Husband finds his wife dead for 5 years on a beach with another man, and the truth destroys him. The sand was scorching when George shakily got to his feet, his eyes fixed on the woman walking beside a man, and the air left his chest. "Jessica!" George shouted, his voice hoarse with shock. The woman turned her face slowly. For an instant her eyes flew open in surprise, as if a memory had struck her. But her expression hardened just as quickly. She swallowed the impulse and answered flat, "You've got me confused with someone else. I don't know you." "It's you! Look at me! It's me, George, your husband!" he begged, taking a step forward. The man walking with the woman stopped at once, stepped in front of her, and raised an arm like a barrier. It was Daniel. "Back off! Security!" Daniel called out, loud and firm, pointing at George like he was naming a criminal. "I just want to talk." "Let me look you in the eyes, Jessica," George insisted, hands open, his voice breaking with desperation. The woman looked at him for a beat. Her lips trembled barely, but the cold mask returned. "This man is following me. Help," she said, pushed by Daniel's glare. The first security guard moved in immediately. "Step back, now!" the guard ordered, clamping down hard on George's arm. "She's my wife. She—" George answered, voice cracking, trying to pull free without fighting. "Restrain him!" "He won't cooperate," Daniel snapped, spurring the guards. The woman didn't flinch or look away, but her breathing gave her away. George dropped to his knees on the wet sand. "Please, just listen to me," he pleaded, his face pressed to the ground. "You're being escorted out until you calm down. Stand up, slowly," the guard warned in a hard voice. Gasping, George lifted his face. "Look at me, Jessica. Tell me you recognize me," he said, breath hitching. She didn't blink. She only lowered her eyes for 1 second before lifting her chin again. "I don't know you," she repeated, steady, killing off the last bit of hope. By sunset, George walked away with a crumpled police warning notice in his pocket, a cold document that labeled him an aggressor, and with a deeper, cutting certainty the woman he called his wife was alive and had humiliated him in front of everyone. The next morning, he went back to the same spot, split between hope and shame. "Were you the lifeguard on duty yesterday?" George asked, urgency held in check. "That's me. I'm Brian. What do you need?" Brian, the lifeguard, answered, alert. "The woman I called Jessica yesterday. I know I looked crazy, but I need to explain," George said quietly, trying to control his nerves. "Go ahead. I saw the whole mess, but I didn't get it," Brian said, folding his arms. "She is, or at least she was, my wife. I buried a closed casket 5 years ago. They wouldn't let me see her face because her family refused. Yesterday, when I saw that woman with that man, I swear it was her." "That's why I yelled," George said, voice tight. Brian frowned, absorbing the words carefully. "The woman you're calling Jessica, did you notice anything specific?" Brian asked, still wary. "Yes, and that's the only thing keeping me upright. Her left wrist. She's had a scar there since childhood, and I saw the same one yesterday." "That can't be a coincidence," George said, almost pleading. "I saw it too. There was a clear scar," Brian confirmed, steady. George closed his eyes for a second, as if the validation let him breathe. Brian motioned for him to follow. "I've got footage from the tower. Not much, but it shows the two of them together. Come see," Brian said, leading him to the base. "Please show me," George said, gripping his own wrist to stop the shaking. Up in the tower, Brian paused the video and pointed. "Here, look, see the bracelet on her wrist?" he asked, indicating the monitor. "That's her bracelet. I gave it to her. It's the same. There's no mistaking it," George said, eyes brimming. "I can keep a copy on file, but officially it only leaves here with a formal request," Brian explained, cautious. "Keep it, please. Keep that copy. I'll be back with the request. I promise," George said, squeezing Brian's shoulder with frantic gratitude. As he walked off the beach, the burial came back to him in one piece. The sealed casket he was never allowed to open, the family's indecent rush to put an end to it, and Tyler, Jessica's uncle and the executor of her estate, taking charge of every decision and shutting down any questions with icy certainty. The anger returned, but organized now. George decided to watch Daniel. For days, he followed the man from a distance, noting every step, every repeated routine. Soon he saw the pattern. Every Thursday, like clockwork, Daniel took the woman to a discreet clinic on the edge of town. George scribbled in a notebook, obsessively checking times. "If I go in as family, maybe I can get close," he muttered to himself, rehearsing in the mirror the worried expression no one challenges. The following week, he took a deep breath and risked it. He walked into the clinic with measured steps, blending in with relatives waiting in the hallway. Down the corridor, a woman in a lab coat moved with a clipboard, trained eyes tracking who went in and out. This was Allison, the nurse in charge of intake. "You're not on today's list. Who are you here to see?" Allison asked quietly, stopping in front of George, suspicious. "Are you the one who checks in patients?" George asked, hopeful. "That's me. How can I help?" she said, noticing his tension. "I really need to talk to you." "It's quick, but just the two of us. No one around," George said, nervous, looking around. Allison hesitated, weighing him. "I don't usually step aside with strangers," she answered softly. "Please, it's about a patient you see. It's too important." "Just a few minutes," George insisted, urgent and sincere. His eyes were pleading. Reluctantly, Allison tipped her head and led him to a quiet corner of the hall. "Say it. What's so urgent?" she asked, keeping her distance. George pulled out his phone with trembling hands and showed an old photo. "She's my wife. They said she died, but I saw her come in here with a man. She has this scar on her left wrist, since childhood. It can't be anyone else," he explained, almost breathless. Allison knit her brows and studied the photo. "I can't share patient information. You understand that, right?" she replied, still guarded. "I'm not asking for her chart. I just want to know if you've seen this scar." "If you recognize it," George said, pointing at the image, desperation tightly held. Allison took a breath, glancing around before answering. "I've always thought something was off. This patient comes every week with the same man. She barely speaks, only signs papers when he allows it. And yes, she has that scar on her wrist." "I'd noticed," Allison admitted, voice low. "Is that man's name Daniel?" George asked, urgent. "That's him," Allison confirmed, uneasy. "He never leaves her side. He controls everything. I've always felt it wasn't normal accompaniment." "How is she registered here?" George asked, alert. "She's listed as Brianna. But there's more. In the check-in photo, she's wearing a bracelet. When I saw it, it stood out. Now looking at your photo, it's the same," Allison whispered. George shut his eyes, chest rising and falling fast. "It isn't a coincidence, it's her," he said, firm despite the emotion. Allison exhaled, torn between fear and conviction. "I don't know if I should fully trust you, but the way you're talking, I feel you're telling the truth, and honestly, I've always suspected something was wrong with her situation," Allison confessed, nervous. "Then help me. You don't have to put yourself on the line. Just keep my contact and send whatever you can," George said, handing over a number on a slip of paper. Allison took it and closed her hand around it quickly. "I'll let you know when she's scheduled again, but please, be careful." "That man watches everyone," she promised, both firm and afraid. George left the clinic with his heart racing. Every word Allison had said hammered in his head. The scar, the forced silence, the fake name. For the first time in 5 years, he felt he wasn't crazy. There were witnesses, concrete signs. He walked home trying to hold down the anxiety, already thinking how to stitch together the proof that was starting to surface. He was deep in thought when the doorbell cut through the silence with a hard ring. He opened the door to find a uniformed officer. "ID, please," the officer said, extending a stamped envelope. "What is this?" George asked, ice spreading through him, a bad feeling already forming. "A restraining order requested by Tyler. Allegations of harassment and attempts to defile the memory of the late Jessica," the officer said, impersonal, just following protocol. George stood frozen, eyes burning across the lines. "This is dirty. He must know she's alive," George said, indignant, voice nearly shaking. "You're prohibited from approaching the family or making any contact. Violate it and you can be arrested," the officer added flat. "He wants to shut me up because I'm getting too close," George muttered, crushing the paper in his fist. "I just enforce the order. Don't make this worse," the officer concluded, walking off. The door closed, and George felt the trap settle. The document didn't mention any clinic, but there was no doubt. Tyler was behind it, tracking every step, always a move ahead. If he dared go back to the clinic, they'd use this against him. He breathed deep and made a choice. If he couldn't move forward where he'd been pushing, he'd cut at the root. The office that registered Jessica's death. "I'd like to look up Jessica's death certificate," George said to the clerk managing stacks of files. "I can check, but we usually only disclose the basics. Why do you need this exactly?" asked Ashley, the clerk at the Vital Records office, looking up with suspicion. "Because they told me my wife died, kept me from seeing her face in the casket, rushed the burial in a matter of hours, and now I saw her again. If there was fraud, it started here," George explained, voice heavy. "That's a serious claim." "Do you realize what you're alleging?" Ashley asked, eyes narrowing. "I'm not alleging anything without cause," George said, steady, though his heart was racing. Ashley went quiet, weighing each word. Then she exhaled. "Give me the details, I'll check," she said, turning to her screen. "I need any detail that shows something off," George said, leaning in. "I'm looking, and something's odd," Ashley said, brow furrowing. "What did you find?" George asked, tense. "The doctor's signature is recorded minutes after the system's closing time. He doesn't file at that hour, and there's also a numbering jump, like this entry was inserted from the outside," Ashley explained clearly. "Can you save the audit data?" George asked quickly. "I can, but I shouldn't. Those files are internal. They're not for public release," Ashley said, hesitant. "Do it anyway. I've got nothing left to lose after what they pulled at the funeral," George said, voice tight. "All right, but I don't see the whole picture here." "What I found is irregular, but it could be a system error," Ashley said, measured, handing over a flash drive with the information. In the days that followed, George couldn't rest. He replayed every detail, every strange number, every memory of the sealed casket. Then the anger came back organized. If there was fraud, it wasn't just on paper. He needed to see with his own eyes. He began staking out Daniel's place, determined to follow his movements in silence. One night, George caught Daniel handing a folder to Tyler at the gate. "Here it is. Check it," Daniel said, curt. "There won't be any problem if you do as I say. Now get in the car," Tyler replied, hard, making it clear who was calling the shots. George snapped photos of the handoff, then the car pulling away with both men inside. He barely slept that night. The images of Daniel delivering the folder to Tyler looped in his mind, along with the certainty they were in this together. He was still trying to organize his thoughts when the very next morning retaliation arrived. Hard knocks rattled the door. George opened it to find two men in uniform with rigid posture. "We're from the clinic. You need to come with us for an involuntary commitment. We have a signed emergency order," one of them said, flashing a stamped document. "Committed? That's insane." "I'm not a danger to anyone," George answered, his voice nearly breaking with anger. "The attached report says otherwise." "You've been classified as a dangerous obsessive," the man said, impersonal. George yanked the paper from his hand and skimmed it. His stomach flipped when he recognized the signature. "It's the same doctor who signed Jessica's death certificate," he muttered, stunned. "It doesn't matter what you think. Our job is to carry out the order. Get dressed. You're coming with us now," the man concluded, already reaching for his arm. "I won't swallow this sham quietly," George said, eyes blazing. Minutes later, George was already inside the clinic, no phone, sitting in a cold, watched room, feeling like they were erasing him from the living world the same way they had done to Jessica. Just then, Allison passed down the hallway and recognized his worn face. She approached slowly, keeping her voice low so as not to draw attention. "What happened to you?" she asked, surprised. "They brought me in by force, faked a report to commit me," George said, voice tight. Allison frowned, visibly unsettled. "That makes no sense. You don't seem dangerous," she said, thinking aloud. "I'm not, and you know it. I'm just trying to prove the woman you see here isn't who they say she is." "She's my wife," George said, desperation tightly leashed. Allison took a steadying breath, hesitating for a few seconds. Then she glanced at the orderlies from a distance and turned back to him. "Okay. I'll help you, but you have to trust me and follow my lead without raising suspicion," Allison said, firm. "You're going to help me get out?" George asked, incredulous. "I am, but only because I feel something's wrong too. Walk normally. Don't draw attention. I'll distract them," Allison said, already heading toward the desk. She started speaking loudly about forms, pulling the orderlies' attention. While they were wrapped up with her, George took a breath, stood, and walked the hallway toward a side exit. Seconds later, he turned the corner and found Allison already in the belongings area. She'd cut through an internal shortcut and was waiting, nervous, holding a labeled bundle. "Here's your phone. Pocket it and go fast before the system locks your name into the protocol," Allison said urgently. "Thank you. I'll never forget this," George said, moved. "Go now." "If anyone notices, I won't be able to cover," she said, pushing the service door open for him. Outside, George drew a deep breath, like coming back to life. Allison came close once more, still nervous. "I'd texted you earlier, appointment cards and off-schedule payments. I didn't know they'd detained you," she said, showing her phone. "With this and the photo of the scar, they won't be able to say I made it up," George said, steady. "They'll try, but now there's proof," Allison replied. "I'll pull it all together. Your courage won't be for nothing," George said. "Be careful. They move fast," she warned. That same night, George laid everything he'd gathered out on the table. Allison's photo of the scar, her messages with appointment records, the flash drive Ashley had given him, and his own notes. He studied each detail, compared times, tried to draw connections, and soon realized he was out of his depth. He didn't have the technical skills or the structure to take on people who forged documents and manipulated entire institutions. With his head pounding and heart racing, he opened his laptop and started looking for someone who could help. After a few tries, he found Michael, a private investigator known for trusting no one but the evidence. George hesitated for a beat, then wrote down the number and called. The phone barely rang before a dry voice picked up. "Do you know what time it is to be calling me?" Michael asked with worn-out irony. "I do, but if you hear what I have, you'll see me now," George said, urgent. "Bring everything, and I'll decide if it's worth my time," Michael said, flat. A while later, George stepped into a small office. Michael sat behind the desk, cold stare, arms crossed like a man who didn't even trust his own shadow. "Start from the beginning," Michael said, pointing to a battered chair. George spread the papers, the phone, and the flash drive across the desk. He drew a breath and poured everything out. From the hurried burial 5 years back to the encounter on the beach. Brian confirming the scar, the clinic where Allison had helped him, the irregularities Ashley found at vital records, and even the attempt to have him committed. He spoke fast but precise, unloading each detail like he was racing the clock to be believed. Michael listened in silence, arms crossed. Only after long minutes did he lean forward. "Show me the proof," Michael said, clipped. George slid over the flash drive and the phone. Michael plugged them in, studied them without a word, his impassive face lit by the screen. "This is no system glitch," Michael said at last, voice firm. George leaned forward, anxious. "So it really is fraud?" he rasped. Michael looked up for the first time. "You're looking at fraud, and fraud always leaves a trail," he said, cool as ice. Hours passed with only the keyboard breaking the silence. Finally, Michael leaned back and turned the screen. "Look here, the stamp marks are identical, repeated with no variation." "That's forgery," Michael explained. George clenched his fists. "And the doctor who signed the death certificate and the report against me?" he asked, heart pounding. "He wasn't active at the time. Couldn't have signed it." "That tightens the noose," Michael said, just as cold. George breathed deep, hardly believing. "So we're past maybe?" he asked, like he was asking for confirmation of life. Michael shut the laptop with controlled force. "Past it. From here on is not suspicion. It's documented fraud," he declared. George sagged back, feeling the weight of Michael's words. For the first time, it wasn't just his memory against the world. The silence felt solid until his phone rattled across the desk. He picked it up with shaking hands. Audio clips were flooding group chats. Messages were popping non-stop, his own voice distorted, threatening to prove by force that Jessica was alive. "Those are my words, but I never said that," George murmured, pale. "Give me that," Michael said, taking the phone. He listened for a few seconds and shook his head. "It's spliced, old cuts stitched into new lines. The breathing rhythm doesn't match the speech timing," Michael said, clinical. Right then, a new message arrived, an open invitation to a ceremony honoring Jessica's memory. Old photos went out with the announcement, listing time and place. "That's the spot. Perfect place to show everything. If I display the proof in front of everyone, they can't deny it," George said, gripping the documents like a shield. "It could be a trap. They know you wouldn't skip this," Michael warned, grave. "If it is, I don't care. I can't stand still while they call me crazy." "I'm going," George insisted, eyes burning. Michael watched him for a long moment, then opened a drawer and pulled out a small recorder. "Then go, but don't go alone. Keep this running in your pocket. If it's an ambush, at least the truth gets recorded," he said, handing it over. Hours later, the hall was packed with flowers and soft speeches, old photos of Jessica projected like she was a distant angel. George walked in tense, papers clenched like armor. "Look, the widower who can't face reality," a man in the crowd jeered. "I have proof Jessica is alive," George answered, lifting the documents firmly. A murmur rippled through the room. Tyler stood from the stage, face grave, eyes glittering with calculation. "He's disrupting the tribute. Get him out of here," Tyler barked, feigning indignation. "I need 2 minutes to show official records," George pleaded, trying to stand his ground. "You're sick. You smear her memory with fantasies," Tyler accused, pointing theatrically. "I know my wife. She's alive," George declared, his voice cracked by the weight of the moment. 2 guards moved in and grabbed his arms. "You're being removed," one said, impersonal. "Afraid of what I've got?" George shouted, struggling. "Afraid of your madness," Tyler said, smirking at the crowd as the room answered with boos. Dragged outside, George fell on the entry step, gasping like he'd been punched. The boos still rang in his ears, and the image of Tyler smiling at the audience burned like fire inside him. He sat there for long minutes, feeling humiliation stick to his skin. When he finally managed to stand, he headed home in silence, too spent to argue even with himself. But before he could flip on the light, he saw an envelope slid under the door. His heart kicked. He bent slowly and found a cheap cell phone inside, one of those basic ones that don't draw attention. He grabbed it and called Michael immediately. "Someone left this at my door. No return address, just a phone in an envelope," George said, voice rough. "Power it up and put it on speaker. Don't touch anything else," Michael instructed. George turned it on. A single video file flashed on the screen. He hit play with a trembling thumb. "It's playing," George said, barely breathing. The image was shaky and dim, but Jessica's tired eyes filled the frame. She looked worn down, hair loose, a face marked by years of silence. "If you're hearing this, forgive me for not saying your name. I can't." "They're watching me," Jessica said, fast, like she only had a minute. "Talk, please. Talk to me," George whispered, hand over his mouth, eyes wet. "My uncle made me disappear to take everything. Daniel keeps me trapped with the promise to destroy you if I go back," Jessica said, voice breaking, tears held back. George almost dropped the phone. "Hearing it from you changes everything. I knew it, but I needed to hear it," he murmured, choking back sobs. "Don't push this on your own. They'll kill you. Take this video somewhere safe and make it public with guarantees." "Don't trust promises," Jessica said, eyes locked on the camera, pleading. The video cut off, the screen going black. George stood frozen, speechless. Michael broke the silence on the other end. "Now it's not just memory or speculation. Make it official. Move to vacate the death record and build a closed-loop dossier, tied together with proof," Michael said. The next morning, Michael spread every paper and record across the desk. He didn't do improvisation. This had to be laid out in a timeline, piece by piece. First, Allison's photo of the scar, then her logs with dates and payments, the flash drive Ashley pulled from vital records, the analysis of the cloned stamps, the phone video. "Finally, we still need to formalize the tower footage," Michael ticked off. "I promised Brian I'd come back with the formal request. I'm going now," George said, resolved, with the proper filing to authorize release. That same day, George returned to the beach. Brian waited by the tower with the same sober look of someone who'd seen it all from the start. After checking the stamped request, the lifeguard pulled a device with the copied recording from a drawer and handed it to George without hesitation. The day of the hearing arrived heavy, the corridors buzzing. George walked in beside Michael, heart pounding like each step was a verdict. The room was full, curious faces, a few cold ones, and across the table sat Tyler and Daniel, far too serene for men who should have been cornered. The judge opened the session and went straight to the point. "I see inconsistencies in the vital records entry, and I accept the documentation presented so far," the judge said. Tyler raised a hand with phony courtesy. "I have simple proof. Here is Brianna, the woman this man confuses with the deceased," Tyler said, theatrical. "What exactly are you aiming for?" the judge asked, looking at the veiled woman walking in. "I want to end his fantasy. She's not who he claims," Tyler said, folding his arms. "This performance proves nothing." "I insist this identity be verified properly," Michael said, firm. "Fingerprints don't always work. Systems fail all the time," Tyler countered, trying to get ahead. "Then we'll use another check," Michael replied, unruffled. The side door opened and Allison hurried in, clutching a folder to her chest. "Your Honor, I'm Allison, a nurse at the clinic where this woman is registered as Brianna, but this is not the same person. I personally saw the real patient last week," Allison said, confident. "Explain," the judge said, frowning. "I have the stamped clinical record with biometric data collected at intake. I can submit it now for comparison," Allison said, extending the folder. "Give it here," the judge ordered. He passed the folder to the technician and gave a nod. Compare this material to the biometrics of the woman Tyler presented here as Brianna, the judge said, firm. The room fell silent for minutes until the technician looked up. The result is negative. The biometrics from the clinic do not match the woman presented today as Brianna, the technician reported, steady. Then this charade doesn't stand, the judge declared, tapping his pen on the desk. This is a setup. You're forging evidence, Tyler shouted, losing his composure. With this body of proof, I move for an immediate search of the defendant's residence, Michael said, looking to the judge. Hours later, 2 officers crossed the gate amid protests. Daniel tried to block their way, his voice climbing. There's nothing to see here, Daniel shouted, trying to stand in the way. Step aside. Don't interfere, an officer said, pushing past him. Look for locks and interior doors, the other officer ordered the team. You won't find anyone, Daniel snarled, sweating. Open this door, the officer said, pointing to a padlocked room. There's no key, Daniel muttered, staring at the floor. Then break it, the officer ordered, already authorizing his partner. The wood gave with a dry crack. Inside, the stale smell of a shut room cut the air. On the bed, a woman lifted her face, startled, eyes hollow and alive. It was Jessica. We're here for you. Stay calm, the officer said, lowering his voice. I can't leave. He said they'd destroy George. Jessica whispered, looking at the door. You're leaving now under protection, the officer said, offering a hand. That same day, an emergency session convened. The judge entered looking straight to the center table, tension thick in the air. Jessica was found at Daniel's home. She'll be heard now, the judge said. Thank you for seeing me, Jessica said, meeting the room with fragile courage. Tell us, in your own words, what happened, the judge asked simply. My uncle forced me to disappear to take everything in my name. He took the assets and the estate as if I didn't exist, Jessica said, voice tight. Daniel did the dirty work. He watched me day and night, controlled every move, in exchange for money and my uncle's orders, she continued, tears in her eyes. Every time I thought of running, the threat was the same. They'd destroy George if I dared to show up, Jessica finished, hands clenched in her lap. You heard her? Michael said, turning to the judge. The evidence matches her account, Michael added, firm. There's no doubt what was done to her, the judge said, staring down Tyler and Daniel. I'll appeal. This is a circus, Tyler yelled, leaping to his feet. You're finished, Tyler, George said, eyes fixed. She was going to stay quiet, Daniel hissed, biting back rage. I'll never be quiet again, Jessica said, lifting her chin. I vacate the death record. I order immediate protection for her and the arrest of Tyler for fraudulent misrepresentation, fraud upon the court, and criminal conspiracy, the judge said, voice firm. Daniel is ordered arrested for kidnapping, coercion, and complicity in the fraud, the judge added, closing the matter. You're safe. I won't rush you, George said, taking a single step closer and stopping. Thank you for not pushing me. I still shake on the inside, Jessica said, exhausted. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here, George said softly. That's what I want, but tonight I just need to sleep without staring at the door, Jessica said, breathing out. You'll sleep under protection, Michael said, gathering the dossier. Now it's written the right way, the judge said, rising. Go in peace, I'll stay, George said, calm. Thank you for not giving up when I needed you not to push on alone, Jessica said, leaving through the side door. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.